Evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome. My name is Mark Neal. I'm the chair of the Froebel Trust and would like to welcome you this evening to our annual lecture, which is now something of a fixture in the autumn calendar. When we launched our annual lecture several years ago, we hired a hall in central London and around 150 to 200 intrepid Froebelians would brave the London autumn weather to come to the lecture. This evening, we're welcoming 2,000 people from around the world to the lecture. I think it's very fitting that we're doing that because Froebel's own message was a universal one about the integrity of childhood and the importance of exploration and play in the self-realization of children. It's also very fitting because the Froebel Trust's own mission is to promote Froebelian principles and practice worldwide, not just in the UK where the trust is based. And we do indeed operate worldwide. Trust funds primary research into the early years in universities across the world. We have international audiences for our research conferences and lectures, and for our forthcoming vacancies on the trustee board, we've received some very strong applications from academics and practitioners around the world. So it's also very fitting that for our lecture this year, we are hugely pleased to welcome Pasi Sahlberg, who draws on experience himself from around the world. Pasi was a teacher and an educational administrator in his native Finland. He was a Director General in the Finnish Ministry of Education and Culture. He was an education expert at the World Bank. Pasi was a professor at Harvard and is now the Professor of Education Policy at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. Pasi has also written extensively, publishing most recently in 2019 a book with the very Froebelian title of Let the Children Play, which I've been reading on the district line going to and fro from the day job this week. It is a fantastic book marshalling the evidence that play is vital to children's development, creativity, self-expression, sociability. Is also a great polemic about the dangers of didactic and test-based approaches, and it's leavened by lots of personal experience of Pasi. I particularly enjoy his account of trying to find a preschool in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Pasi, we are absolutely delighted to have you with us this evening, though it's morning in Sydney. So let me hand over to you. We're dying to hear what you have to say. Pasi.
Thank you so much, Mark, and hello everyone. Good evening if you happen to be somewhere in Europe. Good morning if you here in Asian side. It's 6:30 Friday morning here in Sydney. I'm speaking to you in the eastern suburbs of one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and this is Gadigal land and will always be indigenous land, and I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land where I'm speaking to you and pay my respects to all elders past, present and future, and particularly extend my respects to any First Nations colleagues and friends joining us this evening or this morning. I want to also say that it's a huge honor and pleasure at the same time for me to be given the opportunity to give the Froebel Trust Autumn Lecture. Obviously, like Mark said, it would have been nice to meet somewhere in rainy and foggy London. London is a dear place to me as well, because I spent a long time ago, actually quite some time there, studying at the King's College, starting my postgraduate studies there. And every time I come to London, I feel delighted and happy and inspired by the city. But really, regardless of where you join us today, welcome. Thank you for choosing to take an hour with us with this very noble and important message that, like Mark said, really comes from Froebel's work long time ago, and very much defines also the critical issues of the time today, particularly now when we are still in the middle of this horrible pandemic, but probably have a little bit more optimism now than we had 1 year ago. So we are beginning to see some of those important things that we need to focus on, and definitely that children's play is one of those things that I want to speak to you briefly, and then I really look forward also to the conversation with the small panel that we have today, and also all of you. So you please use the any channels that this digital platform is offering to voice your questions, your points of view, your ideas, so that we can have a lively conversation. If you find the slides that I'm going to show a little bit to make it easier for you to follow what I'm going to say interesting, here's the Twitter handle that you're going to see right now. And I'm going to tweet the slide deck for you so that you can take it with you and use it in your pleasure or work, or having another conversation at home or in your workplace later on. So feel free to check out the social media space. If you're not there, you're going to find this on my personal website as well, right after this presentation. So let's move on, because I don't want to take too much time for these introductions, and I'm also really looking forward to hearing what the colleagues and friends have to say about this. But you know, this is one of those themes that has become very, very dear to me, partly because of the fact that together with William Doyle a couple of years ago, we published a book with the same name, and it has really given me great opportunities around the world to speak to people like you, but also to the audiences that go beyond the early childhood educators, you know, all the way ranging to the universities, and adults and grandparents are interested in this. So let me speak to you a little bit about this topic, and then get into the conversation. So, you know, my personal story, as you heard from Mark, is such that almost exactly 3 years ago, with my family, we decided to come and work here in Australia. I was given an opportunity to work with the former Minister of Education here at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, in looking at how the Australian education could be taken to the next level, if you wish. And the Let the Children Play idea was one of those two ideas that I wanted to definitely bring with me. So I've been working with this theme, and published a book while I was here. And these two little fellows here, you see, they left the what some people consider as the best country in the world to be a child, spend your early childhood in a frozen forest like you see here, and come down to the Australia that is a very different space when it comes to education, and particularly early education. So I've been looking at this transition from Helsinki to Sydney, also through my own children and my own family. We are all here and enjoying many of the pleasures of this beautiful country, but also trying to navigate through some of the complexities that families, and particularly young children, have when they are in the beginning of their education journey. So much of these things, this thinking that you hear from me, is also inspired by stories and experiences that I can see my own children having in Finland, and now having here in Australia. So I'm going to speak about three things. So I've organized this talk into 3 different sections. I speak not extensively, but a little bit about that so that you would understand how I think about this children's play and the importance of play. The first, it's always important to ask that what's happening with children's play around the world. And here, of course, because of the nature of the event, I'm going to have focus on early years of education. But you can whenever I say play, you can think about play as a more general term, meaning play in general in people's lives. Then I want to say something about the power of play, why play is important, but also why the lack of play, the absence of play is critically important to understand. And I'm doing this because my experience is that although we all educators, we probably understand the value of play, we know why is it important, but not everybody else does. That there are parents and other educator colleagues who don't necessarily understand why play is important, and that's a critically kind of an essential element of this conversation and narrative that we need to have. And then I close this with a kind of a uplifting or optimistic note about return of play that I can see. I see many positive things here. One thing I want to say before I kick into the looking at what the play is to really take my hat off. If you are a nursery educator, early childhood educator, work in a primary school or any field of education, I really want to take my hat off for you and everything you've done during the past couple of years. I think honestly that especially early years educators are the essential frontline workers in this pandemic. Many of the early childhood centers and kindergartens around the world have remained open during the lockdowns when everything else has been closed to serve the children in the middle of this disruption. So thank you for your work, what you've done. I understand that in many places, including here, your work has not been always valued as it should, but please do know that while I speak these words to you, that my appreciation and respect hugely is leaning towards you. But we should not have any lecture or any talk or even any conversation without asking what is play, what do we mean by play? And I'm also saying this because as you can hear, I'm not a native English speaker. My mother tongues are Finnish and Swedish, and in my original initial native language, play, talking about play is a very different thing because there are different words meaning play. Just like in London, you have 103 different words for rain. So in Finland, we have different words for activities that look like play, or playing in sports or music or somewhere else. So that's why, these conversations sometimes are not going fast enough because we have different meanings about, what we are actually talking about. So it's important to define. We could spend a lot of time going through the, different interpretations and understandings of what the play is. But I'm just going to give you kind of 3 aspects of play that most play experts and educators agree with. One of them is that play is an activity that is intrinsically motivated. It's something that children or people want to do. They do it because it's important for them. It's fun. It's driven by their own intentions and activities. Then play is also something that entails active engagement. You can see that that people are doing something, or they're moving, or somehow some other ways being engaged. Some people say that, yeah, but there's this play that you can just use your imagination and think. Of course, that's one part, but in most occasions when we think about play, we think about people doing actively something. And then an important aspect of the play is that it results in joyful experience and discovery. And this positive emotions is something that basically all the play experts agree must be part of the play. Not necessarily all the time, but overall the experience need to be positive. Sometimes play may come with a fear and anxiety and something like that, but overall we need to be able to see the positive emotions much before and more strongly than the negative ones. Then there are different types of play. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, just to make sure that we all understand what we are talking about. And this is, again, if you go into the literature of play, you can read about long lists of different kinds of play. You can identify free play or unstructured play, where children can decide what they do, and then you can see more structured play, something that is more led by adults. You can see play indoors in a classroom, home, or nursery, and you can see play outdoors in a forest. And here are some of these things. I'm not going to provide you with the extensive or complete list of things, just to give you an idea that there are really different types of play that people may be thinking more than others. For example, nature play or games that could be board games, could be played at home. And then we have all these imaginative play, risky play, physical play, guided role play, all these kinds of things. I have even Lego here, because Lego is one. Playing with Lego bricks is something that is definitely a free play, but it's often something that happens indoors. So please keep in mind that there are different interpretations and understandings of play, and just make sure that you have a good idea of what your conception of play is when we move into this conversation. So now the first question really is that what is happening in children's play around the world, and there are different sources that we can rely on when trying to answer this. There are studies and surveys done in different countries. I'm going to just give you a very, very quick overall view through my own work here and in some other places as well. First of all, there have been surveys. My colleagues have studied in the United States, and we have done research here, asking parents when they look at the children, their own children or grandchildren or other parents' children, if you wish, and asking them, different things. What do they see in their lives? And here in our recent survey here in Australia, 80% of parents that we surveyed across the country believe that children are under pressure to grow up too quickly. And this is a very similar result than my colleagues in the United States and Canada have found, which leads to a conclusion that most parents, when they're looking at the children, that they think that we are somehow pushing them to grow up too quickly. I'm sure that if you're from the UK, you see the same thing, that we are basically turning what used to be a year one or first grade in a primary school seems to be something that many children do already when they're in a kindergarten or nursery. So this is one thing. And then of course schools are pushing many children to perform sooner and faster and better, younger and younger, and that's probably leading into this conception. Of course, the consequence of this is that it's very, very likely that if this is true, that then children also will have less time to play. And this is the next question that we have been asking, and in a similar surveys around the world, is to ask parents to compare how much their children or children that they see today play compared to the time when they were young. And in our survey here, just like a similar surveys elsewhere, 85 to 90% of parents think that when they were young, that they used to play more than children today. Of course, this is not a completely reliable scientific finding, but it indicates that that the parents see that that we used to play used to occupy much more our time when we were young compared to what the children are doing today. So, all these indications are showing that something has happened to this playtime, and it's very possible that most children today play much less than they should. Certainly they play much less than their parents did. And in the Lager Foundation's own data that they are collecting from different countries, so this is based on evidence from about 15 countries around the world, that almost 20% of children reported that they are too busy to play, which is a really alarming finding. That if the kids are saying that they don't have time to play anymore, then the question is that what are they doing when they're so busy? Of course, there are issues like schooling and some other things that are taking the playtime during their lives, and one of those things is definitely technology that is occupying more and more young people's, very young children's lives now, compared to what it was 10 or 20 years ago. So we have this kind of evidence showing that something has happened to play, and we all need to be mindful and aware of these things. Then, of course, these days the question is that what has happened during this COVID-19 pandemic, and this is something that we don't know exactly what this pandemic and the lockdowns and restrictions have done to play, but there's some evidence showing that the children have lost playtime, particularly those who couldn't go to school or kindergarten or were locked in a long period of time indoors, like we were here in New South Wales for over 4 months since June. That many children kind of lost this playtime that they used to have. We don't know exactly what has happened in the places where the pandemic has been really bringing the heavy restrictions, like Victoria here in Australia, for example. But then there are those who say that this pandemic has brought this kind of a renaissance of play, that when children have not been able to go to school or kindergarten or early childhood centers, that they have been given more freedom at home to kind of go and figure out what to do. And what many children naturally do, or at least they used to do, is to go and play, try to find their old toys and things that they used to play with when there's nothing else to do. Of course, this technology is another thing that has taken a lot of time and the place of the play what children would have naturally do. But what I'm saying here is that if there's a question that how the pandemic has treated play or influenced the state of play question overall, we don't know exactly what it is. My guess is that we're going to see a lot of children suffering from the absence of play, but we also going to see some children and some families who have realized that how important the play is and how good it is actually replacing some of those things that children cannot have access to otherwise, particularly when the children have not been able to go to school. The play can be really good substitute in many issues, not entirely, but some issues. And then, the other aspect in this conversation that we always need to keep in mind is that the research on the long-term consequences of what is called play deprivation, when the children don't have access to high quality play, are very well recorded. And this is something that we need to keep in mind in these conversations, that what do we know about those individuals who have been left outside of the opportunities to play, and some of those consequences are here. It's a long list of mostly negative things that happens and can have a really long-term impact on people, not necessarily in the situation when the play is not possible or taken away, but many years later on. And this leads me to the second section here, that is looking at the power of play. And this is, as I said earlier, that for us this is self-evident that play is positive. If you are here in the spirit of Froebel and his works and the history of early childhood education, that play has always been an important part there, and in a positive way. But we still, I'm including this power of play here also because so often it happens that I'm part of the conversation sometimes with parents, sometimes with authorities, sometimes with fellow educators who seem to think that play is something we do when the real work is completed successfully, or when the children have done all their homework or the important things in school, then they can go and play. And this is fine, but it also leaves many people thinking that these other things are much more powerful and important than play. And it doesn't need to be this way. I think we need to be very, very clear that play itself is something that, again, has very well reported and researched positive consequences and impacts on people's lives, and particularly young people's learning and development. I'm going to speak a little bit about those things. Again, we don't have time to go into all the details, but this is where I refer my next few minutes. This is the book that I published with my co-author William Doyle, who's a New York-based author and play education advocate as well, 2 years ago. And I started to work on this book five years ago. In 2016, Lego Foundation awarded me an annual Lego prize that came from basically by surprise to me, and it came with the expectation or wish that I would continue working on creativity and play somehow that I didn't do that much before. So it was a good opportunity to just by accident to come across this idea of writing something about children's plays, writing something about these things that I'm talking about here with William. And it ended up being this book that is published by Oxford University Press for the parents and for the educators like yourselves, for grandparents and anybody else who is interested in looking at what play means and what has happened to play and why around the world. Our kind of a conclusion of the book, and we went through almost 1,000 publications and journal articles and 250 interviews with the global play experts, and we visited sites all around the world for the research on this book. And our conclusion is that people seem to be saying that play is essential for 4 areas of children's development. One is the social, the other one is the emotional development, and the third one is the physical development, and then finally the cognitive development. In other words, how well children are able to learn new things in their lives. And play has also proved to be very important during this pandemic, because it's a one way that helps children to make sense out of this world, what is happening in a very disturbing and scary and complex world right now, but also discover their own the world within them. So if this is true, as we show in the book, that there's a lot of evidence that is showing this, it becomes obvious that play is a really powerful thing to have for children if we really want to give them a good education for life, so that they can move forward. So these studies are that I mentioned here are done by a whole range of experts, educators and early childhood advocates and psychologists and many others. But then we found that there's an important group of people and increasingly powerful play advocates that we need to engage in these conversations probably more than in many places we have done, and they are the children's doctors. We spoke to a number of leading pediatricians around the world about the same thing, that how do they see the play as part of the children's lives. And many of these things are included in this book. I'm just going to show you, something here, excuse me, something that these pediatricians are saying, because they're really, I don't know whether it's a medical doctors or doctors in general who are able to say things very clearly as they are. And here are some of those things that we heard from pediatricians, that play is such an important part of child's education, that its importance for children's development and learning cannot be overemphasized for parents, schools, and community organizations. And particularly, this is addressed to parents. The parents need to understand that playtime is a critically important and precious time for children to learn, just like their time in a classroom or study doing homework at home. Medical doctors are also very clearly stressing the importance of lifelong success that play is giving children, and the creativity aspect, and how children can apply these things that they learn when they're playing in a sandbox or with their friends in their lives in general and afterwards. So I'm showing these pediatricians' comments here because they are often they're often the community and expert voices that are not included in our educational discourses. So if you're a pediatrician, listen to this, you probably know that you have a lot to offer, and you often offer a different perspective to this conversation. So now, if you're an educator in a little bit older children, or if you have been part of these education conversations recently, you probably have heard about 21st century education, that we are, as educators, we have been pushed to, think about the future and what type of things young people need in their lives in the 21st century, or maybe 22nd century now. And here are some of those things that we often include in these 21st century skills narratives. All these C words and expectations, and now it's about well-being and risk-taking and some other things. We often wonder that, how do you do that in school? How do you teach all these things? And many primary school educators, and particularly secondary school teachers, are kind of confused about how to integrate all these important things in their teaching so that children would have these skills with them. Now, here's the good news for you. If you take the play research seriously, you basically see that that play has all these multiple benefits of play are actually at the heart of these 21st century skills. Isn't it wonderful that we can actually say that in the early years we are building the foundation for these important 21st century skills that all these children need to learn or develop, either through school education or otherwise. Plus, the play comes with this huge benefit, bonus benefit of advancing what we call executive functions of children. That are these executive functions that happen somewhere here in the frontal cortex of our brain, are the ones that are really determining how successful and happy and prosperous our life will be. But working memory, the flexible thinking outside of the box, and being able to control your own behaviors and thinking. Such an important set of things. So, let's keep these multiple benefits of play in mind and advocate these things, that we are actually the 21st century skills educators when we are doing this, and when the kids are having a free play outdoors, that's exactly what they are learning. They are learning for life, and they are learning for work and for the future as well. So this is a kind of a good news part of the story. So I'm coming to the end of my time here, but I want to leave you with this hopeful an uplifting notion of return of play. And there's a lot of evidence, not only this 21st century skill aspect, but also if we look around the world, what is happening in the kind of a middle of this rather negative notion that children seem to be playing less now than what their parents did 20 or 30 years ago. There's also some good news that I'm going to show you very briefly, but let me show you here the notion that is written in the foreword of Let the Children Play by my very good dear friend Sir Ken Robinson, who passed away last year, and Sir Ken was one of the strongest advocates of play. He did a lot of work in the UK in different ways, but also globally. He was one of the thought leaders in this way, and he writes something like this in the foreword of the book, that if you felt the benefits of play when you were a child, I trust you will know in your heart why all children must feel them now. And this is just an example of this brilliance of Sir Ken to crystallize a big idea into the words in one sentence. And just a reminder that if in your memories, if you have fond memories of being a child and playing, what the play brings to you, that we need to give those same opportunities and situations to our children. But this is the world. I often try to think about these developments and issues also in a global view, and of course there are many parts of the world that I don't know what is exactly happening in the world of play, and what's how children experience this. But there are some things that we have included in this research in this book, and some places where I work. Probably the Nordic countries, if you from any of the Nordic Nordic countries joining us today, you probably know that in Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and particularly Iceland, the Nordic cultures are really rich in play. That's why I call it the play culture, particularly in the early childhood education, where play is seen as the fundamental core part of education and growing up and well-being as well. So that's why, and that's always been there. The Nordic countries have always been places where play has a particular place. That's why in the Nordic languages we have different word for children's play, unlike in English where play means so many different things. The UK is one of those places, Wales, England, but particularly Scotland, where I'm currently advising the First Minister of Scotland. And Scotland has done many years already a really good system-wide work on the active outdoor play. In Europe, of course, we have Reggio Emilia, Montessori traditions across Europe, particularly in Italy. And then we have places like Australia, New Zealand. We have a strong nature play movement here now, also accelerated by this pandemic, and the same in Canada. And in the United States, we have seen, if you're joining us from the US, you have seen the movement to return recess into schools and early childhood as well, so that children have opportunities to play. And then China, one of those places that we would probably not expect free play to come as a first place, but the Anji play that we explain in our book is a very interesting Chinese movement that is really early years experience for very young children to play, have a couple of hours every day for free play and make a kind of a learning out of that. The European Union has recently published the children's rights thing, which what is interesting there, I'm using this as an example of a little bit like lost opportunity. In Europe, this children's rights document here doesn't directly include the right to play, and that's why I think probably European Union and community could do even more in this space by bringing play more clearly into these declarations that combine not so much UK anymore, but the rest of the European Union, certainly. So let me close here by saying a couple of things what we can do, and then bringing again Sir Ken here to amplify this voice. Ken writes in his foreword in our book that reintegrating diverse forms of play into children's daily lives calls for a practical and concentrated plan of action to raise awareness and drive change. And this is exactly what he has been doing. He was doing until the last day of his life, actually. And this is exactly what I want to continue to do within his legacy and the movement that Ken has been such an important voice. So just 4 things for those who are asking this question now, that so what can we do in the middle of all these concerning things in the beginning, but then this hopeful situation that we have because of the pandemic. I think the first thing that I really want to put here in this conversation is that we need to see play as a basic human right of every child. We should not see it as something that we need to include or add into all these other things that kids are doing. It has to be seen as a right, as a basic human right, just like it is in a declaration of the rights of the child initially, and see, not ask what is the benefit of play, but we need to ask how do we protect, how do we make sure that every child can enjoy and celebrate this right that they have initially. Then, oops, sorry, there's something going on here. Then the next one is that we need to make time for play in school and home. There's no easier and the better way to bring play back to children's lives than make sure that we have time in school, and that's why the recess is so important around the world, and that we have time at home to do that. People often ask me that how much is good enough, how much time is good enough in a school or a home for children. Of course, it's impossible to say. We cannot say exactly how many minutes or what percentage of time should be allocated for play. But if you insist, if you ask me that, give me something, I would say that, how about making sure that every child, particularly young children, but why not adolescents and all the others, should have at least 1 hour every day in the school, or if they're in a nursery, for free play, so that they can organize and lead their own play. And all the parents make sure that there's at least 1 hour every day at home, either outdoors or indoors, for children to play. So in other words, if you can play 2 hours a day, be physically active and move and do these things, that would be great. So make sure that we give time for children to play. Then let's study the benefits of play. I just gave you a little hint about what this rich literature and field can offer, but we need to be aware of these. What happens when children play, and what happens when they're denied to play, when they don't have access to play. And let's use this evidence. Let's talk about evidence when we speak about importance of play. Let's try to help people to change the views that many of them have, that play is something we do when the important things are done. Play is the important thing, and it can come with the all these benefits that we try to do through other forms of education. And that's something that calls for better conversations. And then finally and lastly here, let's give free outdoor education a priority whenever we can. That is the highest order of play, when children can play outdoors. They can do it in Scotland in the weather and climate that is there. And so we can do it in anywhere. And the Finnish children are playing and spending outside hours and hours every day, regardless of the weather. So let's make sure that this free outdoor play is offered to children whenever possible, because it is the best opportunity to see all these benefits that I've been talking about here. And finally, if you want to read more, here are some of the resources. If you take a look at the slide deck, you can see all these documents. Some of them are from LEGO Foundation, some of them are from the universities, and our work. And here's, of course, the book that I invite all of you to read. The good news is that there is a lot of material available free of charge. Make sure that whatever you read is based on research and evidence and well-established knowledge that I'm sure you will. And finally, I thank you all for your attention. This has been a wonderful opportunity. And remember, just like George Bernard Shaw said, that we don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. Thank you so much. I look forward to the conversation that follows now. Thank you.
Pasi, thank you very, very much indeed for that fantastic survey, and for ending on a very positive, optimistic note. I do think it's very ironic that the very qualities that we are going to need in citizens in the 21st century are the ones that didactic approaches are least well adapted to promote. But before we open it up for a general discussion, we're going to invite 3 colleagues to respond, and I will introduce those colleagues in the order in which they're going to respond to what Pasi has said. So first we have Lucy Parker, who is a trustee of the Froebel Trust, Dr. Lucy Parker. Lucy is the deputy head of Ludwig Nursery School in Hertfordshire, just to the north of London. And Lucy has been instrumental in introducing Froebelian approaches to the school, particularly play with clay and cooking. Lucy is a Froebelian trained teacher. She got her BA, her PGCE, MA and PhD at the University of Roehampton. So if Lucy approaches things from the point of view of a practitioner, our second respondent, Abba Hurry, approaches it as a parent. Abba is also a trustee of the Froebel Trust. Abba is a barrister at the Bar of England and Wales, practicing at Crown Office Row Chambers in Brighton. She's an expert in trust and probate matters, and Abba has worked with many charities. And Abba was drawn into this for the very best of all reasons, because she was looking for good pre-nursery provision for her own child. And that's what led her to Sir Ken Robinson and to the Froebel Trust. And she's also much influenced by practice in Finland because her husband is from Finland and ABBA herself now in Finland. So that is our second respondent, Abba Hurry. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Lynn McNair, who is the head of the Cowgate Under Fives Centre in Edinburgh. It's right in the heart of the old town with a fantastically carved out outdoor space. Lynn is also a senior teaching fellow at the University of Edinburgh. She's been involved in early years education for 30 years and was awarded an OBE for her contribution to early years education in 2009. Lynn too is a Froebelian, University of Roehampton alumnus again. And she's an award-winning author. And I think Lynn would say that it was her passion for egalitarianism and democracy and emancipation and belief that children are rich, active and resourceful that came from observing her own children, Misha and Kurt, playing. So that is our third respondent, Dr. Lynn McNair. But let me hand over now to Lucy Parker, over to you.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you so much, Pasi, for such an inspiring talk. I've been really busily making some notes, and I'm really pleased to respond to you with my practitioner hat on. And I think particularly your comments around the power of play really resonated with me as a practitioner. Obviously, Froebel saw play was central to young children's learning. And I think the quote that you shared when you said the lifelong success of children is based on their ability to be creative and to apply the lessons learnt from playing is just really so true. I think for practitioners, understanding and acknowledging the power of play is perhaps even more urgent now in today's world. And we've obviously talked about the pandemic, and that has been so central to shaping children's experiences at home and in their settings. And obviously children have had such different experiences, haven't they? Some have been deprived of play, some have maybe had more outdoor play than they've ever had before. In some countries we've seen a resurgence in going outside. And I think as practitioners we just have to be so mindful of those experiences that the children are coming into our settings with, and those kind of experiences they've had at home, and supporting with that. We obviously have such a huge responsibility as practitioners to offer children rich play experiences, and I think for me Froebel's principles really help me guide and support that pedagogy of play, and as a practitioner they're so important now, and perhaps even more important than ever. But I think also what your talks really made me realise is that we are so privileged to be practitioners working with young children. It's such a privileged job, and how amazing to think that we are in a position to offer children amazing play experiences and to essentially shape their future and shape their brains and shape their learning, which is amazing. But I think with that privilege comes huge responsibility. And I think that is sometimes quite hard. And I think also, particularly in England, as early years practitioners, we're often not listened to. We're not considered to be experts in our field. I've been in many situations sitting in a room full of educationalists and seen as the kind of poor relation because I'm sitting there representing early years. And I think your comments about the renaissance of play really made me think about the responsibility we as early years practitioners have to absolutely shout and advocate for our children and for play. And I think that can sometimes be really challenging. And I think sometimes in our sector it's difficult. But I think that plan of action that Ken Robinson talks about is so important. And I think we really need to be more confident to draw on the research around play, and as you've shared so eloquently, it is so well researched, and you share that in your book. and that there are so many multiple benefits of play. And I think as practitioners, we need to be much more confident to articulate that research and the power of play. And also, I'd just like to say, I think this has been such an amazing opportunity to come together as a community. I think as a practitioner, being in an early years setting through a pandemic, it's been so challenging and at times quite isolating. And I think, you know, our voices are stronger together, and the power of the internet and technology here is just amazing, that we can all be together in an international context, talking about play. And I hope that this will be the start of some really exciting conversations. Thank you.
Lucy, thank you very, very much. Let me pass the baton on to Abba. Abba, over to you.
The hardest thing in these sorts of things is to remember to unmute myself before I start speaking and not embarrass myself. I have to say that actually, Pasi, your book changed my life, because without reading that book, I wouldn't have been aware of what the Finnish education system offers. And when my husband had an opportunity to come back to Finland for work, it wouldn't have necessarily been something we considered, because I have a fairly good career in England myself. So to effectively give that up, there had to be something that was really the pull factor. And the real thing that made it clear for me was that Finland offered much better opportunities for my children to be children versus what was open to me in England. Very sadly, in England, the state sector in various parts of the country really suffers from a lack of funding, a lack of availability of resources, and children are not encouraged to play for other reasons, because there's a very different way of life and thinking in England in terms of it's uber competitive compared to how I'm finding Finland is. And I just did not want my children to go through that, because that is how I grew up. I'm from an Indian background. Education is regarded as the most important thing. Work hard all the time, playing, waste of time, all that sort of stuff. Though ironically, when my parents started to have grandchildren, they changed their tune. Leave them to it, let them play, blah, blah, blah. So I often think that maybe we should ask people to look at this from the perspective of grandparents. If you were a grandparent, how would you view this for your child? Or as an auntie, as I found it, because when my nephew was interested in slightly odd things, like he really liked drawing graveyards and tombstones when he was 3 years old, very, very odd. I didn't say anything about it. I just thought it's interesting what a child comes up with, and curious, but something different. And I think, unfortunately, in school environments, and he found that as well, because he was quite different to a lot of people he went to school with. He found that he was often told by the teacher, you're not paying attention, you need to do this, you need to do that. And he was a 5-year-old. It just didn't seem to make sense to me that we were taking this approach with what was clearly a very imaginative child, very different to other children, perhaps. But children are different in their own ways to each other. And he's now actually, funny enough, in Australia and much happier where he is. But yes, I just wanted to say that a couple of things on the points that people have raised, and the way that you have sort of summarised the idea of proponing play, because I think that somebody like me, who's an outsider coming to this and having come from it purely as a parent, really, people like me don't really think about these issues unless they become really pertinent. So if I'm not in the education sector, I don't really think about what the impact is on children and the education they're receiving. I pay my taxes and keep my head down and don't worry about it. And this is really an issue in England, particularly because the people making these decisions tend to come from quite a uniform background, where they've all tended to have to work very, very hard, in their view, to get to where they've got to and be academically very, very successful. And the problem is that shuts out another way of thinking. So it's real privilege to be invited to be part of this and to be part of the Froebel Trust in terms of helping with the actual running of the trust. And I think that perhaps there could be some way going forwards where we can sort of connect up with other sort of more related organisations and slowly spreading out, so that this message gets across to other people, because this is a very, very simple message that you're trying to put forward. but my concern following on the back of that is that sadly you have to almost sell this in terms of, oh, look what play can do for your child in terms of his career prospects, and look what they can do in terms of development, rather than play in of itself. So I'm persuaded that playing for the sake of playing is fantastic in itself. And if we can get that message going across, that would be great. But it's been really inspiring to read your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much indeed. And then let me hand on to Lynn with the splendid hat. Lynn, over to you to finish off the responses.
Thank you very much indeed. The first thing I want to say is, Pasi, thank you very, very much for celebrating the work of early years practitioners. So you said that you really appreciate them and respect them. And that's the first thing I'd like to really say, because you're absolutely right. They have worked tirelessly for the benefit of children during this period, and they do all their lives, but particularly it was notable from that. I kind of feel that your the research that you shared is really, really significant about where parents are and where they felt they were playing as children, and the significance of that. But you know, the saddest result probably for me was the one where you said that children don't have time to play. And I think that there's this pressure on children to see play as something add-on rather than something really significant for them. You talked about the kind of, you know, all the aspects that are captured within play, and that's really important, like the kind of emotional benefits, the cognitive, the physical. And you know, you a total fan of Sir Ken Robinson as well, who absolutely fought for us to carry that kind of baton for children to play. And I really, really valued that, and the kind of as an ambassador of it, and as you pointed out, he did it globally and really, really got to many people. During this talk, oddly enough, my Wi-Fi just dropped off, so I've dropped a page of my notes somewhere on the floor, so I apologize for that. But I think that you have really I mean, just look at the chat. You've provided this very vivid and convincing account of play. I think you were speaking to an audience that really were already convinced of the value of it. But I think when they hear someone like you speaking, it will really make them go back and fight again. And I really love that. So somebody said in one of your comments on one of your books that play is the analogue of life. And I really believe, certainly in Scotland, we get a real there's loads of people fighting for that. And somebody else said that when you speak, it's eloquent and it's sustained, and your research is robust and rigorous. And the thing that I spoke to Jane Winnett from, who's also a trustee member, about your book, and I said it's written in a way that is accessible to all. So I think that, you know, parents reading it, I think practitioners reading it, it will certainly speak to many people. And I know that we've only got 5 minutes to speak, so I'll just say that certainly in Scotland, when you speak about the countries like Finland and Iceland and Sweden, I definitely feel in Scotland we have that same passion for play. And you know, it's really, really evident in when you speak to practitioners, they're all fighting for it. The one thing that I'm really delighted that you're speaking to our First Minister, because the one thing that people worry about a little, and this comes up in your book as well, about a kind of germ, the germ ideas, where we're talking about, you know, exchanging play almost for children doing other kind of tasks that will get better results in exams, and you challenged that, which I'm really, really delighted about. So please do get that over to our First Minister. Thank you very much. I really loved your talk.
Lynn, thank you very, very much. Pasi, before I open it up to more general discussion, is there anything you'd like to say in response to what Lucy, Abba and Lynn have said?
No, I just briefly thank you so much for your comments and encouragement. I think I think it's probably better to see, you know, I see that there's a lot of going on in the chat box, or maybe Q&As. But thank you for your kind words, and I'm very happy that you found the book important and interesting. And Lynn, I can tell you, I've been advising the First Minister there for the last 6 years almost, and she keeps a really close eye on these particular things. And when Mr. John Sweeney was a minister there, he was one of those silent champions of play as well. So it is, you know, these words and messages are very well heard and recognized in Scotland and actually UK, in Wales as well.
And sorry, and just one other thing. I think when you said in your book that you actually really noticed that in Scotland there's a real active lens on play, and I think you're absolutely right. That and you know, I was looking at the chat and keeping an eye on the chat as well. I know Mark was. I really genuinely believe that there's this real passion, and I just want Scottish people to stand up and fight for play in their settings.
Yeah. And Mark, the other notion I was thinking when colleagues were speaking is that, you know, I'm sitting here in Australia, and this has the oldest living culture in the world. 60,000 years people have been educating themselves and their children successfully so that they can survive and coexist with the nature here. And play has been such an important part of the First Nations lifestyle and upbringing as well. And that's why when I called it the Renaissance of play, I'm not just thinking about what it was 20 years ago. I'm thinking about what it was 20,000 years ago in the First Nations cultures like here and many other places where people and parents, and particularly grandparents, have understood the power of play without any research or any investigations or explanations. And that's why I feel very humble here in Australia within this kind of a fact that people have been doing these things that we often find ourselves arguing about whether this is good or not to children. They have been doing it successfully here for so long that so it's not inventing play or even reinventing, it's remembering. We need to kind of remember how things were in the past and value and honor that tradition and, you know, give children what they need here.
I'm going to say one last thing and then I promise to shut up. But the one thing about Scotland is there is excellent practice going on throughout Scotland, but actually Scots are quite reticent and they never stand up to say. So I'm asking them to do that. So I'm going to shut up.
All right.
Now then, let me open it up for wider discussion. If you would like to come in, please raise your hand, but otherwise I'll keep an eye on the chat box as well. And you know, one theme, Pasi, from the chat box, which maybe I could get you to comment on. You know, there are quite a lot of questions about, well, how can we influence governments, particularly in those countries where play is not seen as so central to the development of children? And it's kind of paradoxical that the surveys show that parents think that we're trying to bring up children too quickly, but that's not the message that gets through to the politicians. So how do you think we influence the politicians?
Yeah, I think, you know, the parents and grandparents are the only way. I don't think, you know, I've been working with a number of governments and maybe Scottish government is an exception in a sense that they seem to understand this better than other, and in Finland, Nordic countries as well. But I think the only way really is to do this through parents and through communities. But you know, the thing, and that was one reason why we in the first place wanted to write this book for. It's written for parents to make this argument and have a better conversation, because I don't think, you know, first of all, Mark, I don't think that the bureaucrats and politicians, they read this book. They don't have read 450 pages books, and even if they did, I think, you know, much of this thing would just go you know, over many people's heads, that it doesn't kind of capture their their thinking. So that's why I think it's such an important thing to start this conversation in the communities. And I can give you one example. There's actually a number of examples now coming through how this book has changed the legislation. The most recent one is from the state of Illinois in the United States. You know, there was the state of Illinois until now basically had no legislation for giving children playtime during the school days. And now, just a couple of weeks, about a month ago, the House of Representatives passed a bill for the first time ever in the state of Illinois that every child must have at least 30 minutes time to play in every single school every day. So, you know, this type of, and this was driven by parents. This was not a kind of a smart policymakers who kind of realized that let's, you know, this is the way to go. This was the push by the active parent groups. And they used this book and some other resources as a kind of evidence for that. And I think that this Illinois example, and there's similar cases from this city of New York and some other states in, I think, Oklahoma and Arizona, where they have been able to do the similar type of thing. But it's a parents, activists who are driving this. So, you know, if we wait for the policymakers to come to a kind of a wisdom and understanding that, you know, this is what the kids need, it's not going to happen. It's, you know, we're going to be a long time gone before these conversations take off. So that's why, you know, the foundation like yours, the communities that you represent and include are such an important thing to have better informed and more kind of a civilized conversation about this. I don't think that it takes us anywhere if we just champion the single-mindedly one issue and saying that, you know, play is important. We need to, that's why we need to engage the pediatricians. And, you know, this has changed many conversations here. When I bring a pediatrician to the table to talk about things, most people listen. Most people said, okay, let's listen to what the doctor has to say. And because, you know, you can ignore me as an educator, you can ignore my colleagues who are psychologists or scientists, and, you know, we write our papers and, you know, one day we say this and the other day something else. But when the medical doctors and others, and somebody mentioned grandparents, you know, let's bring grandparents to this table and say that, ask them what they see when they're looking at their grandchildren. And I think that through these changed, better informed conversations, we are able to also change the political views and policies. You know, that's what politicians always say, that we change our minds and make decisions when people ask us to do so. That it doesn't, you know, politicians rarely do things that would not be supported by the people who vote them in. So that's why it's so important that every community, you know, have these better conversations about, you know, why this is a kind of an issue, why this is something that we need to champion for, and then make sure that, you know, those who we vote to the office also hear the views that we have. And this is how things probably change faster than in any other way. If you don't have a luxury to have a government or bureaucracy like we have in Nordic countries, that is already, that's why I talk about this play culture, like Abha, you probably know in Finland, you know, in Finland, you don't need to convince anybody about the importance of play. Everybody knows that, you know, this is what it is. But if you don't have that luxury, like here, we don't, it takes much more time to kind of build these conversations. But I think certainly there's a way to do this, but it's just that we just need to be smart. And that's why, Mark, I think what you do through your foundation and communities is such an important piece of work.
Yeah, and you very much reinforce our view that we should spend more time talking to parents and perhaps less time trying to talk to the ministers and officials. It is the parents who can be the most influential. Now, another question that's come up on the chat, Pasi, which I think is an interesting one, was about the transition from nursery to primary school. And of course, in Finland, that doesn't happen until 7, does it? What are your views on that? Because certainly in England, there is kind of quite a sharp distinction and move into the primary years from the nursery years. Do you think we're getting that wrong, and we should try for a much smoother and less sharp contrast?
Yeah, Mark, it's a great question. You know, this is one of those things that I'm always, if I'm contacted by a media or somebody from England or UK, it's almost always about this question, that why in Finland you have the the primary school starts at the age of 7, and in some other countries like here, it's earlier, and in England as well. I think definitely there should be, from the children's point of view, there should be no difference between nursery and primary school. Kids should not realize that, now I'm going to school and last year I was doing something else. That we need to make sure that this transition is smoother, as it is in many Nordic countries. Like in Finland, this transition is really done in a way that doesn't put any burden on kids or parents. That's why in Finland we say that, rather than asking, is the child ready for school, ready for primary school? Does he or she have all the literacy and numeracy, those basics to be successful in primary school? In Finland, we ask, is this primary school ready to welcome all these children as they are? And that's one aspect of this flexibility, to understand that children develop in different ways and different paces, and that it's not, the question should not be whether we can change the kids so that all of them would be ready in a year 1 in a primary school to do something, but the fact should be we should have an education system that is able to adapt in a ways that welcomes everyone. And I think that that's part of this narrative and conversations in England and probably UK in more general, is this kind of a conception of what do we expect these things from the individual children and families, or do we expect this flexibility and adaptability from the schools and systems? But definitely, short answer to your question, Mark, is that I think we should have much better understanding about child development and how differently children develop, and particularly these days when there's so many issues in their lives influencing. Technology is a huge thing now that is making some kids much more earlier ready to do reading and science and those things, and while the others who may not have access or have a kind of extensive access to the technologies have very, very different circumstances there. So I think a key word is flexibility and shifting this readiness focus from children and families to the system and the schools. And I know that in the UK many schools do this already, but the system still seems to be kind of expecting that the kids we have to prepare these 4 and 5 year olds so that they are ready to do something. I'm not sure that this is the best way to think about it.
No, I'm sure that's right. Now, we've only got a few more minutes, so we can probably do one more question. Is there anybody who'd like to come in and ask the question, or shall I pick something from the chat stream? No, it looks as though it's going to fall to me to pick something from the chat stream. Well, another theme, Pasi, that's come up has been around the education of teachers themselves, teacher training, and whether there is enough emphasis on play in teacher training. I don't know what your observations are about that. How far is teacher training, as at the University of Roehampton, maintain that focus on play, or have we lost that in teacher training?
I think, Mark, is a great question. I cannot say anything about how the situation is in around the world. We have people probably all corners of the world here from different systems. So I do not know. But in this, definitely in education systems where there has been a kind of a shifting emphasis on earlier and earlier literacy and numeracy readiness, like in England, some of the push to, prepare children earlier and earlier to be ready in reading and writing and arithmetic or mathematics, is also affecting the teacher education. That the teacher education is focusing more on these very early literacy things and very early kind of a numeracy stuff. That is definitely because the teacher education programs have not expanded, so they still try to do the same things in the same given time. So that time is definitely away from probably from arts and music and play and those other things. That's definitely the situation here. If there's any Australian audience this morning with me here, you probably know this as well. That here we don't have a kind of a systematic preparation of early childhood educators in play. It's still it's still, you know, even in the teacher education programs, it's probably assumed as being something that, you know, you do it as a teacher if you have time to do that after, you know, everything, all these important things have been completed. But I think that, you know, if your teacher education program doesn't have a good content or good elements about making sure that all these new early childhood education teachers and educators understand the power of play, you know, these things that we have been discussing this evening, I think we need to rethink these teacher education programs in a way that everybody would have a basic knowledge and skills. I don't know, Lucy, you're a practitioner here. You probably know better than any of us what the teacher education programs include. But, you know, my view is that there would be, Mark, going back to your question, that there would be probably everywhere room for, you know, rethinking and at least updating these teacher education programs with the content and knowledge that these educators need. But I would like to ask very quickly, Lucy, do you have a view on this, how the teacher education programs are dealing with this?
I think there's a distinct lack of child development, sadly. Yeah, it's very much how you teach maths, how you teach literacy, not much pedagogy anymore. And I think students are now very much, if they get a good placement, then they'll have a good experience. So you're sort of a bit of, you know, there's not that consistency around good child development. So I think it's a real issue. And I think also in the UK, well, England particularly, it's around the training that our practitioners get. So we've lost our what was our nursery nurse qualification, which was such a fantastic qualification. You know, 2 years of really in-depth child development. So that no longer exists anymore. So I think, yeah, I think training and CPD is a real issue.
Mark, let me close it. I know that we are on the time right now, but let me bring this to a close by making another reference to Sir Ken Robinson, who basically I would like to dedicate this evening to his memory and legacy. But I knew him very well, and he often said this in his own way, that you know what we need to do in schools and nurseries with these play things. He always said that just stay away and let the children play. You know, that's the pedagogy. That, you know, you need to understand, of course, the you know, all this knowledge and other things, but methodologically, you know, this is what we need to do. Step away, step aside, and let the children play, and that's where the magic happens.
I think we must let you begin your day while those of us here in Europe end ours. But let me kind of conclude with some thanks. I mean, a special thanks to you, Pasi. It's been a huge honour to have you with us. You have, of course, been preaching to the converted, but you have preached with real power and passion, and we're hugely grateful to you for giving up the first part of your morning to talk to us. Thanks to our three respondents, to Lucy, Abba, and to Lynn. Thank you hugely for those responses. And of course, last but not least, real huge thanks to Victoria, Sasha, and the team at the Froebel Trust, without whom we would not be meeting this evening, and who've done their usual fantastic job of organising the 2021 lecture. So thank you all very, very much indeed. Have a great day, Pasi, and a good evening, the rest of you.